Hello, everyone. I'm so excited you're here. Welcome to AI news that you should know about for the week of October 10th. I'm your host, Ashley Coffey.
And I'm Daniel Hill. Every week, in about 15 minutes, we cover all the AI news stories that you need to know about. This week, we'll be talking about Nvidia and OpenAI's wave of deals and the concerns that that's creating around the AI boom that's potentially being artificially propped up by all these interconnected business transactions. We'll also talk about the city of New York suing Meta, Alphabet, Snap, and ByteDance, accusing them of fueling a mental health crisis by getting children addicted to social media. We'll also talk about OpenAI's head of ChatGPT, Nick Turley, from an interview that he gave where he talked about how they are planning to transform ChatGPT into an operating system. And lastly, we talked about OpenAI's new Sora tool last week. This week, some changes were announced to that tool. Sam Altman's blog explained how they're giving rights holders more control around revenue generation, and there will be revenue sharing.
Wow. We'll be covering all of that today on our show. But first, here's a quick word from our sponsors. Welcome back. Let's dive in. Our top story this week is Nvidia and OpenAI's wave of deals is escalating concerns that the $1 trillion AI boom is being artificially propped up by interconnected business transactions. Let's dive into this because this is the last thing I saw before I went to bed last night, and it kind of blew my mind, and I want to talk about it. So 2 weeks ago, Nvidia agreed to invest as much as $100 billion in OpenAI to help the leading AI startup fund a data center build out so massive it could power a major city. So OpenAI, in turn, committed to filing those sites with millions of NVIDIA chips. And the arrangement was promptly criticized for its circular nature. Now, when I say circular nature, this article goes way beyond anything we could cover on the show. There's a really great graphic that we're going to put in the show notes to Bloomberg.com. But essentially, think of a large circle. And in the middle of that circle is NVIDIA with $4.5 trillion. And then you've got some overlap Venn diagram with Microsoft, Oracle, AMD, OpenAI, Intel. And think about there's so many circular transactions happening between these companies that you just have to see this visual for it to make sense of it all. But what are your thoughts on this, Daniel?
First, I'm glad you highlighted this graphic because it's amazing. If I could just give one example of what's in this graphic, the example of Oracle. Oracle spends tens of billions of dollars on NVIDIA chips. NVIDIA agrees to invest $100 billion into OpenAI. OpenAI uses that money and purchases Oracle. It says OpenAI inks a $300 billion cloud deal with Oracle. All the same money is going back and forth, it seems like. And although I'm not a finance person in any way, it reminds me of what happened in the 2008 financial crisis when part of loans from different categories of risk were put together into one group of loans that was sold, and that was given a much higher rating. And parts of different loans were combined in different ways to make it unclear what was happening. That is what this graphic reminds me of. We'll link to it in the show notes so that you can see it, but it's absolutely worth a deep dive and look into understanding where all this money is flowing back and forth.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Daniel, there. It's definitely giving 2008 financial crisis, housing bubble. We'll see what happens, definitely following that. Next up, New York City sues Meta, Alphabet, Snap, and ByteDance, accusing them of fueling a mental health crisis among children by addicting them to social media. This is a big headline, and I've been following it. So on Wednesday, a 327-page complaint in Manhattan federal court, which I downloaded to read later. This complaint seeks damages from Facebook and Instagram, i.e. Meta, and Google and YouTube owner Alphabet, and Snapchat, and TikTok owner ByteDance. It accuses everyone of gross negligence and causing a public nuisance. Those are the main two charges here. So the city joined other governments, school districts, and individuals pursuing approximately 2,050 similar lawsuits in nationwide litigation in the Oakland, California court. So that's an interesting data point here. First we've seen. Google's spokesperson, Joe Castaneda, said allegations concerning YouTube are, quote, simply not true, in part because it's a streaming service and not a social network where people can catch up with friends, which was interesting to me considering that, Shorts is such a social tool. I mean, I don't know what y'all are smoking, but It's definitely a social social platform. So, defendants blamed for compulsive use, subway surfing, those trends that typically come around on TikTok that you've seen. It's causing people to die. I mean, just that subway surfer incident alone, I think 12 people died from trying to attempt the subway surfing maneuver where you surf the subway on top of the subway or on the sides, and we know that's all difficult, or like terribly dangerous. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen here. And all this has to do is keeping kids safe, which I do think we need to have a more serious conversation as a society on what we're doing to protect the minds of children who are still developing, that are still understanding what's real, what's not, as developing that sense of identity. I do feel like this is a positive thing, but I'm worried it's going to take at least a decade to get it all sorted out. What do you think, Daniel?
I think this is really a good one to dive into because I think back to when I was growing up and we spent time watching MTV and VH1 and other cable platforms. And I can't imagine a city suing those networks that I spent so much time watching. But on the other side of the coin, these social media platforms are designed to be addicting. There's a reason that the people who work at these platforms will not let their children have access to them because they know exactly how addicting they are. So this absolutely makes sense. But the mental health of young ones is the most important thing. And companies have prioritized profits over mental health for so long. So it's nice to see a little bit of difficulty for them having to fight to prove that that's not, in fact, the case when we all know that it is.
Yeah, like we've mentioned on the show, I'm following those other cases of the 14-year-old and the 16-year-old who died by suicide, unfortunately, after having a relationship with Character.ai and OpenAI. Following those, also coming, all of this is coming to a head. We'll see what happens. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will be talking about OpenAI's Nick Turley, who is the head of ChatGPT, on transforming ChatGPT into an operating system, which I can't wait to talk about that, and changes to Sora, giving rights holders more control in revenue generation, plus revenue sharing from Sam Altman's blog.
Welcome back. Let's continue with our stories. And the next one has to do with OpenAI. The head of ChatGPT has given an interview where he talked about transforming ChatGPT into an operating system. Now, this is really interesting because historically, all the things that we've seen, whether it's new apps, AI services, whatever, it's typically all been browser based for the most part when it comes to activities. Most of the technology enhancements over the past few years have been browser based. And the operating system that you use, whether it's Windows, Apple, or something else, has become less important over time because mostly everything is web browser based. And that makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm.
OpenAI is looking at how they can deploy an operating system that would potentially have ChatGPT integrated, much like Apple's macOS or Windows, because really that is the main place that we all do our work on computers. Now, there are things that we do, for instance, Microsoft Office applications that are physically installed on the computer. You might use Microsoft Word that's installed on your computer. Typically, we do use web browser versions of that, but this is something where OpenAI sees an opportunity to develop. And the reason I've picked this is I think we've talked a lot about how Meta sees glasses as the next platform instead of mobile. Meta recognizes, okay, Apple and Google have won on the mobile front. So therefore, what's the next platform that they should focus on? And they've picked glasses and displays. But here, this indicates that OpenAI is interested in the operating system, so potentially competing with Apple and Microsoft for control of your laptop, desktop, and so on. Ashley, what do you think?
I'm so glad that you pulled this, Daniel, because I would love to see a OpenAI OS, ChatGPT OS. Like, imagine an operating system that adapts based on your behavior. That's our utopia, especially when it comes to people's different technical abilities and comfortability with technology. So I love that. But one thing I want to mention here is I do think this is to their detriment. Is Perplexity's Comet browser was first to market for having the agentic browser built in, and I love it so much. I use it. And I really think OpenAI had an opportunity to be first to market there, but they didn't because they were planning on Google being forced to divest from Chrome, and they were positioning themselves to buy it, but then they weren't forced to do it. So they went back to the drawing board of, all right, let's continue developing this browser. So I think it's a little bit behind. I think instead of trying to go in on our browser, go bigger, go to the OS. Like, I think that's just the path of least resistance.
I think you're making a really valid point there. My concern would be now you know that much more data about me based on my entire computer usage, whether it's browsing online or not. And that data level, I'm not really comfortable to give. So interested to see how that would work out or what sort of privacy restrictions would be put in place to prevent that.
Funny you say that because I talked to someone last night. I'm not going to mention names, but they actually did this where they took a time machine backup from their computer, put it into ChatGPT, and asked for a list of specific patterns over like timeline of years, specific like data points relevant to like people or projects. Like that was mind blowing to me of taking an entire computer backup and telling ChatGPT to look for patterns that aren't necessarily available to the human eye that we be like impervious to. That was the first time I've heard someone do that, but honestly, I think we're already there where everyone knows everything about us.
But those are opportunities for automation as well, right? The same things that you click on, you move files around, whatever. If that could be automated, I think that's the opportunity. Let's
Yes.
go on to our last story, which has to do with changes to Sora. We talked about Sora last week as a new app from OpenAI, and it's all around a social media feed, but just filled with AI content. Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, wrote a blog post, and in it, he shared some updates around what they're planning to do. The first one is to give rights holders more control over AI generated content that has the likenesses featuring those rights holders. And additionally, he's talking about revenue sharing in the future with rights holders and other people who have made content that's performing well on the platform. I think the revenue share part is incredibly interesting. That's something we've seen YouTube have incredible success with. They've given out $100 billion over the past 4 years. So I think rev share is incredibly important. But that ability to give rights holders more control is something that's going to be even more key. We saw this week the daughter of actor Robin Williams posted online to say, please stop creating AI generated content using her father's likeness. He wouldn't have wanted that, and she does not want that. And I think this is a really good indicator that we're at an interesting crossroads where decisions have to be made. People might decide that they're okay with having their likeness used in AI content, and some people might decide otherwise. Ashley, what do you think?
I'm glad you brought this up because just yesterday I saw Bernice King, who is the daughter of MLK Jr., say, like, I don't want to see my dad in a WWE scenario, right? Or I don't want to see Kobe Bryant playing NBA 2K. These icons that are no longer here, like the time has arrived for us to have a come to your creator of choice moment and ask ourselves, how do we protect ourselves? Denmark is the only country in the world right now that has protections of people's likenesses. Who, if you're a resident of Denmark, that means you have a right to protect your likeness, your identity that extends to your facial features, your voice, your behavior, all of that. And we just don't have any of that here in the US. California is the only state that's really provided any kind of tangible legislation at this point. But I'm glad you chose this one. And I think it presents a very important discussion that we should be having.
Absolutely. Well, that is it for our AI news that you should know about this week. Let's move on to our AI tip of the week. And this week, I'm going to share something that I've been using.
It's
I
so
have been
good.
tr- I've been trying to do a specific project where I find out where a corporate office is for Apple computers is in New York City. I've used Google Maps to try to find this location and I've been unsuccessful. Whenever I type Apple into Google Maps, it gives me all the stores, but I don't want to know where the stores are. I want to know where the corporate office is. And companies don't put their corporate office address to be publicly available much these days anymore for a variety of different reasons that I don't understand. I did ask Google's Gemini to find where Apple's corporate office is in Manhattan, and it gave me the exact address. And when I asked, how did it know where the address was? It said, well, this information generally isn't available. But what I did was look through public records of rentals and other lease agreements and used that data to determine where the address was. And I'm using this as an example because the way I've been using AI lately is I reach a point where I get stuck and I don't know what to do next and I can't figure out how to solve a problem. And then I ask the AI. So I don't ask the AI everything, rather, just when I'm at my wit's end and I'm not sure where to go next to push this project forward, that's when I ask the AI. So I wanted to share that as how I've been using AI this week.
That is so cool, Daniel. When you texted me what you did, I was like, that is genius. Everyone needs to hear about that because you just hit the nail on the head here. It's that there's so much information out there. ChatGPT is like your ability to get to that information.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that is it for our AI news you should know about this week. You can find links to everything we've talked about in the show notes. Connect with us on social media. We'd love to hear what you think of the show and how we can improve it. You can find me at Daniel Hill Media on Instagram, Threads, and YouTube.
And thank you for listening to today's episode of AI News That You Should Know About. And if you want more tech talk, you can find me on Instagram at AshleyRCoffee89. And you can find my other podcast, Copy and Code, wherever you get your podcasts. That podcast is dedicated to long form interviews of innovators who are in different industries, demystifying emerging tech. But if you're curious about taking the next step into AI, Copy and Consult specializes in helping small to medium sized businesses leverage technology for efficiency and profitability. So if you don't know how to take that next step, reach out to us. We'd be happy to guide you.
Thank you for listening and come back next week for more AI news that you should know about.